Chapter 1. The Handkerchief. The satchel was digging into Anne's hip, which was the only reason she shifted it. She'd been standing in the great hall of Moonblessed Keep for 40 minutes, wedged between a fur trader who smelled like rendered tallow and a woman in gray linen who had been silently judging everyone's posture since the first course. The banquet was louder than Anne had expected, rougher. This wasn't a polished capital affair. It was a frontier king's hall, and the tables were heavy oak scarred with knife marks, and the wine was dark and unwatered, and the laughter came from people who worked with their hands. Anne liked it, actually. She just wished her satchel would stop trying to amputate her left hip. She reached in for her handkerchief. The king hit her from the side. It wasn't elegant. Later, people would describe it in various degrees of dramatic embellishment. A blur of motion, the reflexes of a predator. Honestly, it looked like he tripped, but faster. But what actually happened was this. King Griffin Moonblessed, alpha of the Moonblessed Reach, saw a woman reach into a bag at his banquet, and his wolf made the call before his brain caught up. He tackled her into the flagstones. Anne's elbow hit first, then her shoulder, then her dignity, which made a much louder sound. The handkerchief, white cotton, embroidered with a small sprig of lavender, purchased for 3 coppers at a market in Greenmere, fluttered out of her hand and landed on Griffin's shoulder like a flag of surrender from common sense. The hall went silent. 300 people, every one of them watching, a few still holding their forks. Griffin looked at the handkerchief on his shoulder. He looked at the woman underneath him. She was glaring up at him with the kind of fury that suggested she was already composing the formal complaint in her head, and it was going to be devastating. That, Anne said, very clearly, very loudly, to the king who was currently lying on top of her in front of his entire court, is a handkerchief. Griffin got off her. He did it carefully, which somehow made it worse. She's hurt, his wolf said immediately. The elbow. Check the elbow. He was not going to check her elbow. He was going to apologize, and then he was going to walk to the nearest corridor and consider abdication. She smells like dried rosemary and iron. Why does she smell like that? Is she eating enough? She looks thin. I apologize, Griffin said. His voice was steady because he had been trained for this, the managed voice, the careful register, the one that handled crises and border disputes and foreign dignitaries. It did not, historically, handle handkerchief-related public humiliation, but it was all he had. I misread the situation. Anne stood up. She did it without help, which he noticed. She brushed off her skirt, practical wool, road-worn, not court fabric, and looked at him with an expression that made his wolf go very quiet. You misread a handkerchief, she said. Yes. As a weapon. At your own banquet. The security briefing suggested. Was the security briefing conducted by someone who has ever seen a handkerchief? A sound came from somewhere in the hall. It might have been Marsh, Griffin's steward, making a noise that was technically a cough. Griffin chose not to investigate. I will have your quarters arranged, Griffin said, because he had to say something. With my apologies. My quarters were already arranged, Anne said. I was invited here to supply the royal household. I have a contract. I also have a bruised elbow and what I suspect is a cracked opinion of your intelligence. But the contract stands. She picked up the handkerchief from where it had fallen to the floor. She tucked it back into her satchel. She looked at him one more time, a look that contained a full audit of his character, and found it wanting. But she paused. Just briefly, because the king was standing very still. Not the stillness of a man composing himself after embarrassment. Too still for that. Too long. The kind of stillness that didn't belong in a human body, that belonged in something older and more patient. And his eyes, she could have sworn, in the torchlight, that the brown had gone amber at the edges. Just for a moment, just enough to notice. Anne filed it away and walked back to her place between the fur trader and the posture judge. Griffin's wolf, She's going back to her spot. She hasn't eaten. The bread course was 20 minutes ago, and her plate is untouched. Someone should. Griffin turned and walked to the high table. Marsh fell into step beside him. 17, Marsh said. What? People who are currently telling someone else what just happened. That I can count from here. The actual number is certainly higher. Thank you, Marsh. The baker's apprentice is making a hand gesture that I believe is meant to represent the tackle. It is not flattering. That will be all. Shall I have the apothecary's quarters moved to the east wing, as originally arranged? Or would you prefer to station her somewhere you're less likely to encounter her and be reminded of, east wing? As arranged. That will be all. Marsh inclined his head and did not quite smile. Griffin sat down at the high table. His wolf settled into a low, persistent hum, the kind that didn't stop, that just sat there like a stone in his boot. The rosemary. Why rosemary? It's in her clothes. She carries it. She works with it. Griffin cut his meat and did not think about rosemary. Is the east wing warm enough? It gets cold on that side after midnight. Someone should check he ate. Slowly, carefully, the way a king eats when 300 people are watching him and at least 17 of them are reenacting his worst moment of the year, with hand gestures. Across the hall, Anne was finally eating. She'd taken a piece of bread and torn it into precise quarters, eating each one systematically. Her satchel was back on her hip. Her elbow was already purpling. Something in her, the quiet part, the part that noticed before she decided to notice, was still cataloging. Not the humiliation. Not the haul. His hands. The way his hands had moved when he took her down. One on her shoulder, one on the satchel strap. Even in the wrong, even moving on instinct, his hands had known where to be careful. His hands, that quiet part said. Remember his hands. Anne ate her bread and did not look at the king again. Later, in the east wing, in a room that was larger than any she'd slept in on the road and somehow colder for it, Anne unpacked her satchel the way she always did. Jars first. Organized by compound family. Tools second. Brass scale, magnification lens, grinding pestle. Notebook last, placed on the small desk by the window with a pen beside it. The room was fine. Clean linen. A fireplace with actual wood, not the dry dung she'd burned on the northern circuit. A view of the mountains through a window that actually had glass. Her elbow was a deep bruise now, purple-black at the center, yellowing at the edges. She'd applied her own arnica salve, the one she'd made in Greenmere, the one that worked better than anything the keep's physician could offer. She knew this because she was good at what she did. It was the only currency she'd ever had that worked everywhere. His hands, the quiet part of her said again, unbidden, careful even when wrong. She closed her eyes and thought about compound ratios until the wanting settled into something she could carry. Chapter 2. The pattern everyone missed. She was summoned at 7 the next morning. Anne had expected this. She'd spent the walk from the east wing composing 3 different versions of a refusal to accept his apology, calibrated for sincerity, formality, and devastation respectively. She had also packed her satchel with everything she might need for a day of work, because the contract still stood regardless of whether the king had the observational skills of a panicked heron. She had not expected to be led to a workroom instead of a receiving chamber. And she had not expected what was on the table. Maps, incident reports. 3 pages of testimony from a steward in the northern garrison. A sealed pouch that smelled, faintly, of nightshade. Griffin was standing on the other side of the table. He looked like he hadn't slept. He also looked like he didn't expect her to be impressed by that, which was the first correct assessment he'd made in her presence. I'm not here to apologize again, he said. Good, I wasn't going to accept again. Something moved behind his eyes. Not amusement, not quite, but the architecture of it. He pushed the documents toward her. 3 incidents in 6 weeks, he said. A supply cart contaminated outside the northern garrison. A well fouled in the lower ward, and a pouch, he nodded at the sealed bag, intercepted by my guard captain before it reached the kitchens. My counsel has reviewed the evidence. They believe it's 3 separate events. And you don't. He looked at her. The managed mode, the careful, political, public-facing register, was still on, but thinner than it had been at the banquet. The real Griffin was closer to the surface this morning. She could see it in the set of his jaw. I think it's one person, he said. I think they know what they're doing, and I think my council can't find the thread because they're soldiers and politicians, and none of them know anything about. He stopped. Looked at the pouch, looked at her. About compounds, Anne said. Yes, you want me to look at this. I want you to tell me what my people can't. He's trusting us, the quiet part of her observed. Already. That's unexpected, his hands. On the table, flat, he's not gripping anything, he's just offering. Anne sat down. She unpacked her satchel, methodically, the way she always did. Jars arranged by compound family, her small brass scale, her magnification lens, her notation book. She placed each item precisely. Griffin's side of the table looked like a war had been fought on it, and both sides had retreated in confusion. She opened the sealed pouch first, sniffed, did not touch. Held it under the lens. This isn't nightshade, she said. My captain said, your captain is wrong. This is monkshood concentrate, aconitum, similar color when dried, completely different effect. Nightshade is slow. This is fast. Whoever prepared this wanted the target dead within the hour, not the week. Griffin said nothing. He was watching her work. His wolf was watching too, but his wolf was concerned with different details. She hasn't eaten. It's 7 in the morning, and she came straight here. There's bread on the sideboard. And cheese. And the dried pears from last night's. Griffin did not mention the bread. Coward. Anne moved to the incident reports. She read them the way she read everything. Completely, precisely, making small notes in the margin of her own book. Griffin gave her the space to work. He didn't hover. He didn't interrupt. He stood on his side of the table and handled his own correspondence, and if he occasionally stopped writing mid-sentence because she'd made a small sound of discovery, he didn't comment on it. 20 minutes in, she needed the garrison testimony page that was on his side of the table. She reached across. So did he. He'd seen her reaching and was already moving it toward her. Their hands met over the page, not dramatically, not with orchestral swelling, just the plain mechanical fact of 2 people reaching for the same piece of paper at the same time. Griffin pulled back first. Too fast, the kind of too fast that announces exactly what you're trying not to announce. Her hands, his wolf said. Steady. She has calluses on her fingertips from grinding compounds. I'm noting this for no reason. Anne took the page. She didn't look at him. But the tips of her ears had gone faintly pink, and she didn't know that about herself. But Griffin's wolf had become an unwanted expert on the details of Anne's face. 40 minutes later, she looked up. It's one person, she said. You're right. The compound signature is consistent across all 3 incidents. The stabilizing agent is meadowsweet derived, which is unusual. Most people use vinegar. This person was trained, and trained specifically. Trained how? As an apothecary, or close to it. She tapped the garrison testimony. The contamination method here. It's elegant. It's not what a soldier would do. It's not what a politician would think of. This is someone who understands how compounds move through organic material. How they bind. How they break down. She stood up and came around to his side of the table to point at a specific line. She didn't need to. She could have pointed from across. She came around anyway, and stood beside him, and her shoulder was close enough to his that he could feel the warmth of it without touching. Here, she said. This word, saturated. She leaned across him to tap the line. Her arm crossed his line of sight. The inside of her wrist passed 6 inches from his face, and he could smell her. Not the rosemary this time. Not the professional scent of compounds and dried herbs. Underneath that, warm skin and something that wasn't a compound, couldn't be bottled, couldn't be labeled and shelved in one of her precise little jars. His wolf went completely still. Griffin did not move, did not lean, did not breathe in a way that would register as breathing in. He sat in his chair with his hands flat on the table and let her lean across him, and did not do a single one of the things that every nerve in his body was filing urgent formal requests to do. Anne was talking about saturation patterns. She was pointing at distribution data. She was being competent and precise, and her wrist was still right there, and she either didn't know what she was doing or she knew exactly what she was doing. And Griffin couldn't tell which was worse. Your steward wrote that the cart supplies were saturated. But look at the distribution pattern he describes. That's not saturation. That's targeted application to the grain sacks only. Someone opened specific sacks, applied the compound to the top layer, and resealed them. That's not a poison, it's a signature. They wanted you to find it. She straightened up, stepped back. The air where she'd been was still warm. Griffin's jaw shifted. The real Griffin, not the managed one. They wanted me to know. His voice came out lower than intended. Anne noticed. She didn't say anything about it. She went back to her side of the table, deliberately, specifically, the way you put distance between yourself and something you'd stood too close to. They wanted you to know someone was close enough to touch your supply lines. The point wasn't to kill anyone with contaminated grain. The point was to show you they could. And the well? Same, the concentration was too low to be lethal. Uncomfortable, maybe cramps, but not death. They're escalating, Griffin, testing access, proving they can reach further each time. She pointed at the sealed pouch. That was the first real attempt. Kitchens, aconitum, lethal dose. They've graduated from demonstration to execution. She was still standing beside him. Neither of them had moved. Griffin was aware of this in the way a man is aware of a fire he's standing too close to, registering the heat, not stepping back, knowing both of these things. You just rebuilt my entire threat assessment in 40 minutes, he said. Your threat assessment was already there. Your people just couldn't read the chemistry. Can you? That's what I do. Then stay. Work this with me. Not as a supplier, as someone who knows what they're looking at. His hands, the quiet part of her said, on the page. The way he turned it so I could read it. His thumb on the edge so it wouldn't tear. He's asking us to stay. Not as a courtesy. Because he needs what we know. I'll stay, Anne said. She stepped back to her side of the table. Not because she wanted to, but because staying beside him any longer would have required acknowledging why she was staying. But I'm reorganizing this table. Your filing system is a crime against the natural order. Something moved behind Griffin's face. Not the managed expression. The real one, trying not to surface. My filing system works. Your filing system is what happens when paper is left unsupervised. I know where everything is. You knew where the sealed pouch was because I pointed at it. I was about to point at it. You were not. His wolf, she's staying. She's reorganizing. This is a professional arrangement. Is there more bread? Someone should offer more bread. Marsh appeared in the doorway. He was carrying a breakfast tray. He set it on the one clear corner of the table, poured 2 cups of tea, and placed a plate of bread and cheese directly in front of Anne with the precision of a man following standing orders. I didn't ask for, Anne started. Standing policy, Marsh said, with a face that gave nothing away. The East Wing is provisioned at 7. I took the liberty of redirecting. He left. Anne looked at the tray. She looked at Griffin, who was suddenly very interested in his correspondence. She ate the bread. It was warm. Someone had thought to warm it. Good, Griffin's wolf said. That's fine, that's just logistics. Someone should also check if the East Wing heating is adequate, because Griffin wrote a sentence that was technically about grain tariffs, but contained none of the words in the correct order. Chapter 3. The name on the list within 3 days. Their workroom had become a battleground of 2 fundamentally incompatible organizational systems. Anne sighed, jars labeled in her small, precise hand, arranged alphabetically within compound families, cross-referenced in her notation book. Her tools cleaned after every use, her writing consistent, legible, the same size on every page. Griffin sighed, a topographical map of chaos, reports stacked by urgency, but also by size. which meant the most critical document in the kingdom was currently being used as a coaster. His handwriting changed depending on his mood. There was a knife stuck in the corner of the desk that Anne was fairly sure served no function except to alarm visitors. Your filing system, Anne told him on the second day, is an act of war against information. I know where everything is. You spent 11 minutes looking for the garrison report this morning. I found it. It was under your elbow. His wolf, she's organized, she's competent. This is irrelevant information. I'm noting it for no reason. Has she eaten lunch? Marsh had begun delivering a daily report that included, alongside the standard governance briefing, what he called the count. The count was the number of times someone in the keep had referenced the banquet tackle in the previous 24 hours. 12 yesterday, Marsh said on the third morning. Down from 17. The baker's apprentice has retired the hand gesture, though I'm told a guard in the lower ward has developed a more elaborate version involving both arms. Thank you, Marsh. The apothecary's bruise is yellowing nicely, if you're interested. I am not interested. Of course, Your Majesty. Anne, who was in the room and heard all of this, did not look up from her work. But the corner of her mouth moved. They fell into a rhythm that neither of them named. Griffin handled the political threads, who had access, who had motive, who had moved through the keep in the weeks before each incident. Anne handled the chemical ones, compound analysis, method reconstruction, supplier tracing. They compared notes over the worktable in the evenings, which became the most dangerous part of Anne's day, though not because of the assassination plot. It was the evenings, the way the workroom fire burned down to embers, and neither of them moved to restock it. The way he read her notes and asked questions that showed he'd actually understood them. Not the polite questions of a man humoring an expert, but the sharp ones. The ones that meant he'd followed the logic and found the gap before she pointed at it. The way she caught herself watching him think. The slight furrow. The way he turned his pen between his fingers. The way his whole body went still when he found something. The fourth evening, he was reading her analysis of the well contamination when he said, without looking up, you wrote consistent with someone who learned compound preparation on a circuit route rather than a settled practice. How do you know that? The improvisation. A settled apothecary has a workshop, consistent tools, consistent temperatures, access to precise measurements. A circuit apothecary works with what they have. You learn to substitute. Vinegar for mineral acid. River water temperatures instead of controlled heat. This compound was made with substitutions that only make sense if the person didn't have a proper workshop. You know this because you're a circuit apothecary. I know this because I've made the same substitutions. In worse conditions, usually, he looked up then. She was writing, her pen moving in that small, precise script, and the firelight was doing something to her hair that his wolf refused to stop cataloging. The way the light catches thee, this is irrelevant. This is completely, she should have a warmer blanket. The east wing is cold at night. I could mention the blanket without it being what Anne said. She hadn't looked up, but she'd felt him watching. Nothing, you were staring. I was reading, you were reading my face. Your face was between me and the page. Anne's mouth did the thing. The small sideways movement that wasn't a smile but lived in the same neighborhood. Griffin's wolf noted this with the desperation of a man drowning who had been handed a very nice rock. She was almost, I don't care. Has she eaten? The dinner tray is untouched. Someone should. On the fifth day, something shifted. Anne had been tracing the meadowsweet supply chain. Who grew it? Who dried it? Who sold it in quantities sufficient for compound preparation? Meadowsweet was common enough in teas, but the concentration required for the stabilization method she'd identified meant someone was buying it in bulk or growing it themselves. She'd sent queries through Griffin's trade network. A response came back from a merchant in the Northern Circuit. Yes, a man matching the general description of apothecary, traveling, bought meadowsweet in bulk, had passed through 6 months ago. And again 3 months ago. And again 6 weeks ago, 2 days before the first incident. Anne pinned the timeline to the wall above her side of the table. Griffin came to look at it. He stood behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat of him at her back, and studied the dates she'd mapped. "He's been here 3 times, Griffin said. His voice had dropped. Not the half-octave shift of conscious intensity. Something lower, rougher. The kind of register that came from somewhere behind the man. Anne felt it in her spine before she heard it in her ears. She turned slightly. He was close enough that she could see the change. The way his pupils had tightened, focused. The way the amber was bleeding into the brown at the edges of his irises. Predator focus. He was reading the timeline the way a wolf reads a threat vector, not the way a king reads intelligence. "At least," Anne said, and her voice was steady, but something in her posture had shifted too. Weight forward, chin slightly lowered. A readiness that wasn't quite human. Griffin noticed. He noticed because it was the first time he'd seen her move like that, like the wolf in her was closer to the surface than the apothecary. These are the ones with the paper trail. A careful apothecary doesn't always leave one. You would know. I would know. He reached past her to tap the earliest date on the timeline. His arm was alongside hers. She could see the tendons in his forearm, the way his sleeve had been pushed up past the elbow because he'd been working and had stopped performing King 3 hours ago. His arm, her wolf said. Next to ours. The warmth of it. If we lean back. Just slightly, just enough to, Anne did not lean back. She made a note on the timeline, and Griffin stepped away, and neither of them mentioned it. Marsh delivered the count that evening. 9. The scullery has developed a hand signal that Captain Hale has informed me is being used to indicate incoming tackle. I am told it's used primarily when someone approaches unexpectedly. Wonderful, Griffin said. Additionally, the visiting wool merchant from the Eastern Reach asked me, directly, at the kitchen entrance, without preamble, whether it was true that you'd body-checked a woman holding a hanky. I informed him that the situation was more nuanced than his summary suggested. He seemed disappointed. Is there anything else? The Queen's, the apothecary's workroom, requires additional candles. She works past midnight. Griffin looked at Marsh. Marsh looked at Griffin. A brief, silent negotiation occurred regarding the word Marsh had almost used and then corrected. Candles? Fine. Very good, Your Majesty. The 7th evening was the one that nearly undid both of them. Anne had been working late, the candles Marsh had provided burning low, her notation book open to the suspect list. Griffin had come in from a council session, still wearing the managed face, the careful political register that he used on his advisors. He'd sat down at his side of the table and started reading her latest analysis without asking, because they'd stopped asking each other for permission to read each other's work 3 days ago. Halfway through, he laughed. It wasn't a managed laugh. It wasn't the polite acknowledgement of humor that a king deploys in diplomatic settings. It was a short, surprised sound, genuine, unguarded, startled out of him by something she'd written. What? Anne said. You annotated the merchant testimony with this man wouldn't recognize Meadowsweet if it introduced itself and shook his hand. It's an accurate assessment of his botanical knowledge. It's the funniest thing in this entire investigation. It wasn't meant to be funny. He genuinely couldn't identify Basic, I know. That's why it's funny. He was smiling, not the managed version, the real one, rare and specific, the kind that changed the whole geography of his face. Anne realized she was staring. She realized she'd been staring for several seconds. She realized his wolf could probably hear her heartbeat doing something it shouldn't be doing, and she absolutely could not make it stop. His face, her wolf said. When he smiles, oh, that's. Griffin looked up from the page and caught her looking. She didn't look away fast enough. He didn't look away at all. The room was very quiet. The candles had burned to their last quarter. The fire was low, and neither of them had restocked it, and the chill of the frontier night was pressing in through the stone walls, which meant they should have been cold, but somehow were not. Anne stood up. She told herself it was to stretch. She'd been sitting for 3 hours, her back was tight, it was reasonable. She walked to the window. Griffin stayed at the table. This was the correct distance. This was the professional distance. This was the distance maintained by two people working a conspiracy investigation, who had no reason to stand any closer than Anne. She turned. He was standing. She hadn't heard him get up. He was beside the table with her notebook in his hand. He'd picked it up to hand it to her, maybe, or to show her something, but that wasn't what was happening now. What was happening now was that he was standing, and she was standing, and the room was very small. "The eighth testimony," he said. His voice was careful, managed, but his hand, when he held the notebook out to her, was not quite steady. "You flagged something in the margin. I couldn't read your handwriting. My handwriting is perfectly legible. It's not. It's small and precise, and it looks like a code designed to exclude people who don't grind compounds for a living. It says inconsistent timeline. 3 days unaccounted for between purchase and deployment. Where was he? That's what I thought it said. I wanted to be sure." He was still holding the notebook out. She reached for it. Her fingers closed around the same edge his fingers were holding, and neither of them let go. It was nothing. It was a notebook. It was a shared edge of paper, and it was the closest they'd been since the banquet tackle, and this time both of them were standing, and both of them were looking at each other, and the distance between the edge of the notebook and the rest of it was about 4 inches, which meant their hands were 4 inches apart, which meant Griffin's thumb moved. Not much. A fraction. Across the paper toward her fingers, Anne felt it the way she felt compound reactions, at the molecular level, in the part of her brain that registered change before her conscious mind caught up. She let go of the notebook. "I should," she said. "Yes," he said. Neither of them finished the sentence. Neither of them moved. The fire popped, a log settling, the only sound in the room, and Griffin took 1 step back. Then another. He set the notebook on her side of the table, precisely where it belonged, aligned with the edge of her notation system. "I need to check the perimeter with Hale," he said. It wasn't true. Hale checked the perimeter. Griffin had never once in 10 days checked the perimeter personally. Anne knew this. Griffin knew she knew this. He walked to the door anyway. He stopped in the doorframe. He didn't turn around. She could see the set of his shoulders, not the managed posture, not the king. Something held in place by effort alone. "Good night, Anne. Good night." He left. His footsteps went down the corridor, steady, even, the walk of a man who was maintaining a very specific pace, because the alternative was turning around. Anne stood in the workroom alone. The fire was dying. The candles were guttering. The notebook was exactly where he'd placed it, aligned with her system, and her hand was still warm where it had been 4 inches from his. She sat down. She picked up the notebook. She opened it to the 8th testimony. She read the same line 4 times. "His thumb," her wolf said. "On the paper. Moving toward us. He didn't mean to do that. He couldn't help it. If we just want," Anne set the notebook down. She pressed both palms flat on the table, his side of the table, the chaotic side, still warm from where his arms had rested, and she let herself feel it. All of it. Not the professional respect. Not the intellectual partnership. The other thing. The thing she'd been filing under every category except its name. She wanted him. Not his trust. Not his intelligence. Not his kingdom or his wolves or his correct but terrible decisions. Him, the man who couldn't find his own trade reports, the man who checked the perimeter he'd never once checked before because he couldn't stay in a room with her for 1 more minute without doing something about the 4 inches between their hands. Her eyes were stinging. She wasn't going to cry about a notebook. She was an apothecary. She dealt in compounds and ratios and precise measurements. She did not cry about notebooks or thumbs or the distance between. She pressed her forehead to the table. Just for a moment. Just long enough to admit it. "I don't want to go back to the road," she thought. Not the wolf, her, Anne, the woman underneath the system. "I want to stay in this room with his mess on the other side of the table. I want to stay." It was the most terrifying thing she'd felt since the poisoned water. The 8th evening, they worked in silence. Neither of them mentioned the notebook. Neither of them stood up. The 4 inches had become the entire room, and both of them stayed on their own side of it, and the air between them was so charged that Marsh, delivering the evening tray, paused in the doorway, looked from one to the other, set the tray down without a word, and left faster than Griffin had ever seen him move. On the 9th evening, she found it. The handwriting in her notebook didn't waver. Her voice didn't change. But something in her went very still. Not the productive kind, not the focused kind. The kind of still that meant the ground had shifted. Griffin, he looked up. She didn't use his name often. When she did, it landed. The stabilizer isn't just meadowsweet derived, it's a specific preparation, meadowsweet reduced in birch alcohol with a juniper catalyst. I've only seen this method once before. She set the notebook on the table. A man named Corwin taught it to me. Griffin waited. He could hear it in her voice. There was more, and it was going to cost her. Corwin was a traveling apothecary. I worked alongside him for 2 seasons on the northern circuits. He was, she paused, chose the word carefully. Decent, skilled, he had a practice in a village called Hatch at the far end of the Harrow Pass. Griffin went still. His wolf went quiet. Not the tender denial quiet, a different kind. You closed the Harrow Pass, Anne said. 3 years ago. Yes, the raiders were using it to hit settlements on this side. The closure was, correct. Griffin's voice was flat. Not defensive, just true. 86 people in 3 villages would have been exposed if the pass stayed open. I closed it. The trade route died. Everything on the other side of the pass that depended on that route died with it. Yes, Corwin's village. His practice. Anne stopped. She didn't know the details. She knew what Corwin had looked like the first time she'd met him on the road, thinner than a man his age should have been, carrying everything he owned in a single pack, with the careful hands of someone who'd been good at something and no longer had anywhere to be good at it. His wife left, Anne said quietly. He told me that once. He didn't say why. I think I know now. Griffin didn't flinch, didn't soften, didn't perform regret. I'd make that call again, he said. 86 people. 3 settlements. The math doesn't change. And Corwin? Would still be right to be angry about it. His wolf, she's looking at us. She's seeing it, what it costs. The decisions that are correct and terrible at the same time. She's not looking away. I don't. This isn't, she should eat something. It's late, and she hasn't. Anne's wolf. His hands. Flat on the table. Steady. He doesn't hide from what he's done. He just carries it. If wanting were enough. If just wanting hard enough could. This was the moment, though neither of them would have said so. Not the tackle, not the trust, not the evenings over the worktable. This, Griffin being honest about the ugliest part of his own competence, and Anne choosing to stay in the room with it. So we know who, Anne said. And we know why. And we know he's not going to stop. No, she closed the notebook. He's not, and Griffin, if he's been watching the way I think he has, he knows I'm the one who can identify him. Griffin's expression didn't change, but his hands, flat on the table, closed into fists, just once, just briefly, before he opened them again. Then we work faster, he said. Chapter 4. The tainted kit Corwin was good. Anne had known that. She'd watched him work for 2 seasons, seen the precision of his compounds, the steadiness of his preparation. What she hadn't known was how that precision would feel when it was turned against her. The contamination was subtle. Not the jars, those were sealed, and Anne checked her seals the way she checked everything, with a system too methodical to defeat from the outside. But the water supply to her workroom, the pitcher on the sideboard that Marsh refilled every morning. A trace compound in the water that would have been undetectable by taste, undetectable by scent to anyone who wasn't specifically trained to. Anne was specifically trained. She caught it at the lip of her cup, a faint mineral flatness where there should have been the slight iron tang of the keep's well water. She stopped, set the cup down, held it under her lens. Griffin, he was across the workroom. He crossed it in 4 strides. She showed him the cup, the lens, the faint precipitate visible at the waterline. "It's a contact compound," she said. Her voice was level, clinical, the apothecary voice, the one that handled crises by naming them precisely. Absorbed through the lips and mucous membranes. Slow acting. I would have been symptomatic within the hour, dead by evening. Griffin's wolf was not tender right now. She's alive. She's here. She's alive. She didn't drink it. She's alive. The managed mode was gone. Griffin's jaw was set in a way that had nothing to do with politics, and everything to do with the animal fact of someone threatening what was his, not his mate, not yet, not claimed, not marked, but his. The word sat in his chest like a fist. She needs to be moved. Guards on her door. Guards on her workroom. Guards on the corridor. She should be in the central wing where I can. I know what you're thinking, Anne said. Griffin looked at her. She was still holding the cup. Her hands were steady. Everything about her was steady, and it was making him furious in a way he couldn't direct at her, because it wasn't her fault. You're thinking guards, she said. New quarters. Restricted access. You're thinking about making it so that no one can get near me without going through your entire security apparatus. Yes, don't. Anne, he's watching. He knows I found his signature. He knows I'm the one who can identify him to your court, your guard, your counsel. If you lock me away, you confirm it. And you lose the only advantage we have, which is that, right now, he thinks I haven't identified him yet. Griffin's hands were on the edge of the worktable, white-knuckled. His wolf was very loud and very specific about what should happen next, and none of it involved letting Anne stay exposed. I don't care about the tactical assessment. I don't care about the advantage. She was almost, the cup was at her lips. Someone should have been watching. I should have been. I am asking you, Anne said, to trust me. 3 words. The same 3 words that could have come from any conversation, any argument, any negotiation between 2 people who wanted different things. But from her, in this room, with the poisoned water still catching the lamplight in her cup, they landed like a marking. Griffin let go of the table. Tell me the plan, he said. Anne told him. As she spoke, something happened that Griffin had only seen once before, in the courtyard, when she'd leaned forward over the timeline. Her posture shifted. Her shoulders dropped into a settled readiness. Her eyes, which were usually warm and precisely focused, went flat. Not cold, focused the way an animal focuses. Like a lens narrowing. Her voice didn't change, but the way she held her body did, and Griffin's wolf went absolutely still in recognition. She's like us. Not the same, different, but the same kind of thing. The animal is right there. It was the first time Griffin had seen Anne's wolf this close to the surface while she was in full command of it, and it did something to him that he filed under not relevant to the current crisis, and absolutely did not examine. They would set a trap. Anne would continue working openly, same schedule, same workroom, same routines. But the compound in the water told her exactly how Corwin was accessing the keep. The water came from a cistern that was restocked from the lower well every morning, and the lower well was accessed through a service corridor that connected to the outer walls. Corwin wasn't inside the keep. He was coming and going through the service access, which meant he had help, someone on the inside leaving the corridor unlocked. Hale found the someone within hours, a scullery worker named Geddes, no ideology, no grievance, just a man paid 5 silvers to leave a door unlatched on certain nights. Hale detained him quietly, but they left the corridor unlocked. If Corwin found his access sealed, he'd find another route they couldn't predict. Better to control the path he already trusted. When he comes through, Anne said, Hale's people pull back to the corridor junction and let him pass. Seal the exit behind him. He walks into the workroom thinking the route is still clean. I'm here. You're in the adjacent chamber. He doesn't leave. And if you don't? Then you'll have the service corridor watched, and you'll have Captain Hale's people on the outer wall, and you'll catch him on the way in. She looked at him. But I will see it coming. This is what I do. There was something underneath that sentence. Griffin heard it. Not the confidence, the need. The precision wasn't just competence. It was the way she held herself together. If she wasn't useful, if she wasn't the person who saw the pattern and named the compound and built the system, then what was she? A traveling apothecary, with a satchel and a bruised elbow and nowhere in particular to be. He didn't say this. He didn't need to. He'd spent years running a frontier kingdom by being the person who made the hard calls nobody else could make. He knew what it felt like to build your identity around the thing you were good at. He knew what it cost. Your plan, Griffin said. Your terms. But Hale's people are on the wall tonight. Agreed, and the water gets tested every morning before it reaches this room. I was going to do that anyway. And you eat dinner. Anne blinked. What? Griffin was already turning back to his side of the table. Marsh will send something up. Marsh, who had appeared in the doorway at some point during this exchange with the preternatural timing of a man who had been a steward for longer than either of them had been alive, said, I've taken the liberty of adding a security review of all water sources to the morning briefing. I've also noted that the apothecary's evening meal has been arriving cold for the past 3 days because she doesn't eat it until the candles burn down. Shall I have the kitchen hold a warm plate? Yes, Griffin said. I didn't agree to, Anne started. The warm plate is non-negotiable, Marsh said. The East Wing has limited reheating options and cold soup is, in my professional assessment, a morale issue. Anne looked at Marsh. Marsh looked at Anne. Griffin looked at neither of them. Fine, Anne said. The warm plate. But I'm eating it when I'm ready, not when someone decides I should. Naturally, Marsh said, and left with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had won a negotiation the other party hadn't realized was happening. Anne's wolf, quiet and dreamy and fixated, his hands. On the table again. Letting go. He let go because we asked him to. If we want hard enough. If we just. Anne sat down and began planning the trap. 2 days passed. Anne worked. Griffin governed. The keep moved around them in its ordinary rhythms while they waited for a man to come and try to kill her. The first day was the hardest. Griffin sat through a council meeting about grain storage allocation for the northern garrisons while his wolf conducted a parallel, entirely unhelpful session. She's in the workroom, alone. The guards are outside, but the window is, did anyone check the window? The workroom window faces the lower courtyard, and if someone, Griffin made a note about grain tonnage. The note said window. She said she'd eat lunch. Did she eat lunch? Marsh was supposed to deliver at noon. It's noon. Has Marsh, Your Majesty? His border commander was looking at him. The allocation for the Harrow garrison? Double it, Griffin said. His wolf, she skips meals when she's focused. It's a pattern. Breakfast she eats because Marsh puts it in front of her. Lunch she forgets. Dinner depends on whether the work is going well or poorly. If well, she forgets. If poorly, she eats the bread first and saves the cheese for later. I don't know why I know this. I'm not. This is just. Your Majesty, doubling the Harrow allocation would exceed our. Then, don't double it. Increase by a third. Is there anything else? After the council cleared, Griffin stood at the window of the meeting chamber. He could see the east wing from here. The workroom window, a light was burning. His wolf, she's there. She's working. She's fine. I'm not checking. I'm looking at the courtyard. For unrelated reasons. Captain Hale appeared beside him. The service corridor has been watched since dawn. 2 men at the outer wall entrance, 1 inside at the lower well access. No movement. Good, the apothecary seems well. Hale said this with the carefully neutral tone of a man who had noticed his king staring at the east wing and was choosing to frame it as a security briefing. I wasn't asking. Of course, Your Majesty. Marsh delivered the count that afternoon. It had dropped to 6, though I should note that a new variant has emerged among the kitchen staff. They've begun calling any sudden unexpected movement doing a griffin, which I believe is the first time Your Majesty's name has been verbed. I'm uncertain whether to classify this as disrespect or linguistic innovation. Marsh, I have also confirmed that the apothecary ate lunch. The full serving. including the soup, which she does not typically finish. Griffin looked at his steward. Marsh looked back with an expression of absolute professional innocence. I didn't ask about her lunch. No, Your Majesty. I provided the information proactively, as part of my standard East Wing status report. Shall I discontinue? A pause. Griffin's wolf, very quietly, don't discontinue. Continue as you see fit, Griffin said. Very good, Your Majesty. The second day, Anne sent for Griffin. She'd been running a full audit of her compound stores. If Corwin could reach her water supply, she had to verify every jar she might use in an emergency. Anything contaminated in her own kit could kill her faster than an assassin could. The antimony jar was 3/4 empty. She hadn't used the missing quantity. He's been in this room, she said. She was calm, clinically calm, the apothecary voice, the one that handled emergencies by naming them with precision. Not recently. Before the water. He came into this workroom, opened this jar, and took roughly 30 grams of antimony compound. He didn't need it for the plot. He has his own supplies. He took it to prove he could be here when, based on the quantity and the settling of the remaining powder, 4 days ago. Before we set the watch. Griffin's hands were flat on the table, very still. She's been working in a room he's already been inside. She's been sleeping in a wing he can apparently access. For 4 days. She's been, Griffin. Anne's voice cut through the noise in his head. He can't get in now. Hale's people have the corridor. The watch is set. This changes nothing about the plan. It changes what he's already done. What he's already done is finished. What he's going to do is what we're ready for. His wolf was not tender right now. His wolf was the low, steady hum turned up to something that vibrated in his chest. Not anger exactly, something older than anger. Something that lived in the animal fact of someone having been close enough to touch what was his. I don't care about the tactical assessment. He was here. In this room, while I need you to stay with the plan, Anne said. Can you do that? He looked at her. She was standing in the center of the workroom, her hands at her sides, her chin slightly raised, not defiant, not challenging, asking the same way she'd asked him to trust her, the same steady, specific, exact way. Yes, he said. Good. On the second night, Corwin came. Anne heard it first, not the sound, but the absence of it. The draft from the service corridor that had been constant all evening suddenly stopped, which meant the lower door had opened and someone was in the passage. She didn't move. She kept working at her table, her back to the corridor entrance, her hands steady on her notation book. Her wolf was still, patient predator still, for the first time not dreamy, not wistful, just absolutely focused. The door to the workroom opened. She knew his step. 2 seasons of traveling together, you learn a person's weight on floorboards. Hello, Corwin, she said. She turned around. He was standing in the doorway, a man she'd known on the road, a man she'd shared fires with and traded remedies with, and once helped set a dislocated shoulder for a farmer outside Millhaven. He looked older than the last time she'd seen him. Thinner, harder in the way that grief makes people hard when they don't have anywhere to put it down. His hands, the careful, precise hands she remembered, the ones that could prepare a tincture in camp conditions that most settled apothecaries couldn't manage in a proper workshop, were holding a vial she recognized by color alone. Anne. His voice was the same. Quiet, measured, the voice of a man who labeled his compounds and cleaned his tools and did everything precisely because precision was all he had left. I didn't want it to be you. That's why I'm here instead of putting it in another water jug. You deserve to see who's doing this. You poisoned my water. I needed to know if you'd catch it. You always were better at identification. Even on the circuit, you'd name a compound by smell that took me 3 tests. Is that a compliment or a confession? Both, I suppose. He held up the vial. This one's faster. I know what it is. Monkshood extract, concentrated, juniper catalyzed. You're using the Meadowsweet stabilizer, the same one you've been using since the grain sacks. She watched his face. I taught you the base for that stabilizer. Do you remember? The second winter. You couldn't get the temperature consistent, and I showed you the river water method. Something moved across his face. Not shame. He was past shame. Past the place where shame had teeth. Grief, maybe. The calcified kind. The kind that had hardened into purpose because the alternative was hardening into nothing. He closed the pass, Anne, I know. My village. My practice. My wife. 12 years of building something, and it was gone in a season because a man I'd never met drew a line on a map. The line stopped raiders from hitting 3 settlements. The line killed mine. His voice didn't rise. That was the worst part. The steadiness of it. The same precision he brought to his compounds. 86 people on this side of the pass. That's the number he uses. I've heard it. 86 people saved. Do you know how many were on the other side? 41. 41 people who lost their trade route, their supply chain, their connection to every market that kept them alive. 14 left within the year. The rest held on. Most of them are gone now too. And you. And me. He looked at the vial in his hand. I'm the last one who couldn't leave it alone. Anne's wolf was very still. Not wistful. Not dreaming. Present in the way an animal is present when something is happening that requires all of its attention. You were decent, Corwin. I remember that. I was decent when I had something to be decent for. That's not how it works, isn't it? The silence between them was the kind that held weight. 2 people who had known each other in a different context. A simpler one, standing on either side of a line that one of them had crossed. He'd do it again, Corwin said. He told you so. He said it to your face. He did. And you're still here. Working with him. Standing between him and... He stopped. Looked at her more closely. Oh, Anne. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Corwin was an apothecary. He could read a compound by its traces. He could certainly read a woman by the way she stood when she talked about a king. He doesn't deserve you, Corwin said. It wasn't bitter. It was tired. The observation of a man who had run out of energy for anything except the truth. That's not yours to decide, Anne said. Captain Hale came through the service corridor behind Corwin. 2 guards from the outer wall. Griffin came through the workroom's main door. He'd been in the adjacent chamber for 40 minutes, close enough to hear every word, and his wolf had been silent for all of them. Not the tender quiet, not the pestering quiet, the absolute stillness of an animal that has decided the only thing that matters is the person in the next room and whether she is still breathing. He'd heard everything. The altitude tincture. The shared winters. The way Corwin's voice had softened when he said her name. The moment Corwin had looked at her and understood what she was to Griffin. And through all of it, Griffin's wolf had said nothing. Not one word about food. Not one question about heating. Just the relentless, unbroken attention of something that had stopped pretending. Corwin looked at the guards. At Griffin. At the trap he'd walked into, the trap she'd built, with the man whose decision had destroyed everything Corwin had. He set the vial down on the nearest surface, carefully, the way an apothecary sets down a dangerous compound, with respect for what it could do. You heard it, Corwin said to Griffin. Not asking. All of it. The pass, the 41. The math you do that lets you sleep at night. Griffin stepped forward. Not threateningly, just present. The managed mode was gone. The real Griffin was here, and the real Griffin looked at Corwin the way a man looks at the cost of his own correct decisions. The decision was right, Griffin said. The cost was real. Both things are true. And you had every reason to be angry. You didn't have the right to do this. Corwin's hands were shaking. Not fear, just the end of something he'd been holding together for 3 years. The purpose, the plan, the careful escalation that had given his grief a direction to point. Both things are true, he repeated. That's what makes it unforgivable. They took him. Quietly, without spectacle, Griffin's orders. The hall didn't need another scene. Corwin walked between the guards with the same quiet precision he'd brought to everything else, and as he passed Anne, he said one thing more. The altitude tincture. I still use it. I never changed your formula. Anne watched him go. She didn't cry, she didn't shake. She stood in the workroom that still smelled faintly of juniper from his vial, and she breathed, and she let the grief of it sit where it sat, and she didn't pretend it was smaller than it was. Chapter 5. After Griffin found her in the workroom an hour later. She'd sent him away after Corwin was taken, not harshly, just a quiet "I need the room for a bit" that he'd respected, because he was learning that respecting Anne's requests was more important than fixing things for her. His wolf had disagreed. His wolf had disagreed loudly, specifically, and with detailed suggestions about blankets, tea, food, proximity, and the structural inadequacy of the East Wing's heating system. Griffin had overruled all of it and gone to deal with Corwin's processing with Captain Hale. Now he was back. Anne was reorganizing her kit, not because it needed it, because her hands needed something to do and her kit was the thing they knew best. She'd replaced the contaminated water, retested every jar, verified every seal. Methodical, complete, the system holding even when the person operating it was not entirely held. You don't have to do that tonight, Griffin said from the doorway. I know. She checked a seal. Quarter turn, resist, quarter turn back. He was decent, Griffin. I know what he became. But he was decent, I heard. He taught me the altitude tincture I still carry. 2 winters ago. He spent an extra hour showing me the temperature curve because he said I'd be on higher ground than him and I'd need it first. She set the jar down, picked up the next. He also tried to poison your kitchen and then tried to kill me. I'm holding both of those things. You can hold them as long as you need to. I'm not asking permission. I know you're not. She looked at him then. He was leaning against the doorframe, the same posture, but different now. The managed mode wasn't absent because he'd dropped it for her benefit. It was absent because there was nothing left to manage. The conspiracy was over. The danger was cleared. The political aftermath would be handled tomorrow, in the council chamber, with the careful Frontier King register that Griffin wore like armor. Right now there was just the man, the wolf, the doorframe, and the woman checking seals on jars she'd already checked. You heard everything he said, Anne said. Yes, the 41 people. Yes, what did you think? Griffin was quiet for a moment, not the managed quiet. The real kind. I thought he was right about the numbers, Griffin said. I saved 86. I lost 41. I knew the count when I made the call. I've known it every day since. He's right that I chose one side over the other. He's wrong that the choice was casual. He didn't say it was casual. No, he said it was unforgivable. He might be right about that too. Anne set down the jar. The kit was done. Every seal checked. Every compound verified. There was nothing left for her hands to do. She stood at her side of the table for a long moment. Griffin stood at the door. The workroom held the silence between them, the good kind, the kind that didn't need filling. The fire was low. The candles Marsh had provided were burning steadily. Through the window, the frontier dark pressed against the glass. No city lights, no distant glow. Just stars and the outline of the mountains beyond the keep. Your side of the table is still a disaster, Anne said. The words came out before she decided to say them. They were not the words she'd been thinking. They were the words underneath the words she'd been thinking. The ones that meant I'm still here, the situation is still normal, we are still the people who argue about filing. Griffin's mouth moved. Not a smile. The architecture of one. I know where everything is. You lost the grain tariff letter for 40 minutes this week. I found it. It was under your breakfast plate. Which is where I read it. Over breakfast. It's a system. It is not a system. It is the absence of a system. It is what happens when a man who runs a kingdom applies the organizational logic of a field camp to state correspondence. I ran a field camp for 6 years. It worked. You ate off the same plate you used for tactical maps. Efficient, Anne's mouth did the thing. The sideways pull that wasn't a smile, that lived in the same neighborhood as a smile, that Griffin's wolf catalogued with the frantic dedication of a man compiling evidence he didn't want to need. She did the I'm not, the mouth thing, she did it, I don't care, this is irrelevant, she's still here, after everything tonight. She's still here, and she's arguing about filing. I don't care about any of this. Has she eaten since this afternoon? It's past midnight. The kitchen is closed, but Marsh keeps a cold tray in the come here, Anne said. She didn't know she was going to say it until she did. The way she said it, low, certain, without the precision she usually kept like a wall between herself and everything else. Griffin's wolf recognized it before Griffin did. Not Anne the apothecary. Anne underneath. The voice dropped the way his did when the wolf was close. She probably didn't know she'd done it. Griffin crossed the room. Not fast, not slow. The exact pace of a man who had been waiting to be asked. He stopped at the edge of the work table. Her jars between them. Her system, his chaos. The space where their two ways of working had collided and somehow produced something that functioned. You could have pulled me out, she said. After the water. After the antimony gap. After we found out he'd been in this room while I slept one floor above. You asked me not to. Most kings wouldn't have listened. Most apothecaries wouldn't have caught the compound at the lip of the cup. He paused. Most people wouldn't have stayed in a room they knew an assassin had already entered and used it as the bait point for a trap. I had a system. You had jars and a brass lens, and a very precise notebook. That's the system. It works. It does. His voice was quieter now. The real register, not managed, not performing. Just Griffin. It works because you're the one operating it. His wolf, she's right there. She's fine. She's here. I'm not, the east wing heating was adjusted. I had it adjusted. That's not, it's infrastructure. It's building maintenance. It has nothing to do with, she's here. She's alive. She caught the compound. She built the trap. She faced Corwin. She's here. I can't, silence. For the first time in 2 weeks, Griffin's wolf had nothing to deflect with. Anne reached across the table. Not for a jar. For his hand. She took it, the left one. The one that had been on her shoulder when he tackled her. The one that had been flat on the table when he told her the truth about Harrow Pass. The one that had gripped the table edge white-knuckled when she asked him to trust her. His hands, her wolf said. Finally, Griffin looked at her hand on his. Something moved behind his face. Not the managed register, not the real one. Something underneath both. The animal layer. The part that had been saying her name in every other sentence for a week and pretending it wasn't. Her hands are warm, that's a fact. I'm noting a fact. Her hands are warm and she's touching us, and I am not, Griffin, Anne said. Yes, your wolf has been asking Marsh to check whether I've eaten. Griffin went very still. I don't know what Marsh told me. On the second day. Marsh said, and I'm quoting, His Majesty has inquired about your meal schedule with a frequency that suggests either genuine concern or a research project. I am choosing not to clarify which. Griffin closed his eyes. His wolf, I was simply, as a matter of basic hospitality, come here, Anne said again. He moved around the table. The jars between them were gone now. She was standing. And he was standing. And the distance between them was about the same as it had been the night of the notebook, 4 inches. Maybe less. Neither of them stepped back. You tackled me, she said. Her voice was steady, but her hand came up to his chest. She didn't remember deciding to do it. She could feel his heartbeat. Fast. Faster than a king's heartbeat had any right to be. And underneath it, the wolf. The low hum that had been there for 2 weeks, running through him like current through copper. I did. In front of 300 people. Yes, his hand came up and covered hers where it rested against his chest. Not moving it. Holding it there. Holding it against the heartbeat she'd already found. It was the worst first impression I've ever received. I know. It was also, she stopped. She could feel the warmth of him through his shirt. She could feel the wolf underneath, the steady hum, The thing that had been asking about her meals and her heating and her candles for 2 weeks because it couldn't say the real thing. The most honest thing anyone has ever done to me. You were wrong, and you were protecting your people, and you didn't pretend it was anything else. Griffin's other hand came up, not to her face, to the curl of hair that had fallen across her jaw. He moved it back. His fingers stayed. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, slowly, the way he turned pages, careful, deliberate, nothing wasted. Anne's breath caught. The real kind, where your body forgets its own rhythm because something is happening to the skin of your jaw that makes it very difficult to remember you are a professional who deals in compounds and ratios. You spotted the pattern in 40 minutes, he said. His voice was low. Close, the managed mode was so far gone it might as well have been in a different kingdom. My entire council had it for 3 weeks. Your council doesn't know Meadowsweet. My council doesn't know anything. His thumb was still on her jaw. His eyes were steady on hers, and she could see it. The amber flooding the brown, not just a ring at the edge now, but spreading. The wolf coming fully to the surface the way it did when he was this close to her. Home, his wolf said. The word arrived without preamble, without denial, without the careful pestering deflection that had been its register for 2 weeks. Just the word. Bear. Home. Anne kissed him. Not precisely. For the first time in her life, she did something without precision, without system, without methodology, without the clean organizational logic that had held her together since she was old enough to label a jar. She kissed him the way she'd wanted to since the 7th evening, since the notebook, since the 4 inches that had been everything, her hand on his chest and his heartbeat under her palm, and the whole careful architecture of her self-control, coming down like a shelf of compounds knocked over by someone who didn't understand the filing system. Griffin's arms came around her. When that happened, she wasn't sure. His hand was in her hair, not the careful curl tuck from a moment ago, something less managed, something that held on. She could feel the wolf in him, the hum that had been running for 2 weeks suddenly loud, present, the vibration of it in his chest against hers. When they separated, it was only by inches. His forehead against hers. Both of them breathing. That doesn't complete anything, Anne said. I know. In wolf terms. I know what it doesn't do. Do you know what does? Griffin pulled back just enough to look at her. The real Griffin, no management, no performance, no careful frontier king composure. Just the man. Just the wolf. Just the steady, specific, unsurprising fact of someone who had been hers since the moment she reached for a handkerchief, and he made the worst tactical decision of his career. Yes, he said. When you're ready. I've been ready since the notebook. The notebook. The 8th testimony. The margin note you couldn't read. Your thumb moved on the paper, toward me. Griffin closed his eyes. You noticed that. I notice everything. It's what I do. He kissed her again, slower, with intention, the way he did everything when the managed mode was gone and the real Griffin was running things. Then his mouth moved from hers, along her jaw, to the place where her neck met her shoulder, and she could feel the question in it. Not spoken, just present. His breath against her skin. The waiting. Yes, she said. Her hand was in his hair. Griffin, yes, the marking was quiet. In the workroom, among the jars and the documents and the cold tea and the chaos of his correspondence, his mouth at her shoulder, the bite careful because even in this he was what he was, a man whose hands knew where to be gentle. Her fingers tightened in his hair. The bond settled into place, and it felt like not a compound reaching stability. That was the metaphor she'd expected. The one the apothecary in her would have chosen. It felt like coming home to a room where someone had left the lamp on and warmed the bread and refused to rearrange your jars no matter how many times you told them the system was better. Home, his wolf said. That's, I knew. I was not worried. At any point. I was monitoring. For hospitality purposes. Anne's wolf, Quiet for the first time, not wistful, not dreaming. Just here, his hands. On us. Holding, not letting go. Wanting was enough. Wanting was enough after all. 3 weeks later, the workroom had achieved a tent day. Anne's side was still labeled, organized, and cross-referenced. Griffin's side was still a landscape of controlled disaster. But the border between them had blurred. Her notation book occasionally appeared on his stack. His pen migrated to her jar of writing implements, and there was a spot on the worktable where both their hands rested when they were reading the same document. Close enough to touch, but not always touching, which was somehow worse. Marsh delivered the morning report. The count, he said, has dropped to 2 references per week. I consider this substantial progress, though I should note that the baker's apprentice has begun referring to the East Corridor as the handkerchief wing, which may represent a permanent linguistic shift in the keep's geography. Noted, Griffin said. Also, your morning correspondence includes 3 petitions, a border dispute summary, and a letter from the Greenmere Trade Guild requesting, and I am reading directly. Assurance that visiting merchants will not be physically engaged by the Crown upon arrival. That will be all, Marsh. The Queen's breakfast has been sent to the workroom. As per standing, she's not. Griffin stopped. Looked at Anne, who was reading a compound analysis and not looking up. The Queen's breakfast. Fine, thank you. Marsh left. Anne turned a page. Queen, she said. He started it. You didn't correct him. I was going to correct him. You were not going to correct him. Griffin picked up his pen. His wolf settled into the steady hum it had maintained for 3 weeks. Not loud, not quiet, just present. Always present. She had breakfast. The full one. With the dried pears. I wasn't checking. Marsh mentioned it. Marsh did not mention it. She had breakfast. That's all that matters. Anne finished her page, made a note in her book, and reached across the blurred border of their worktable to rest her hand on his. He didn't look up. But his pen stopped. And his thumb moved, once, slowly, across her knuckle. Home, his wolf said. Just that, nothing else needed.